Welcome back to Nolan Financial Radio. My name is Tara Nolan from Nolan Financial. And, if you're new to the show, I would just say right off the top, please feel free at any point to give Chris and I a call at 719-210-4242 if you have a burning question that we didn't get to, or if you're just ready to go ahead and set up that complimentary discovery call and we can do it face to face or virtually. Also, if you're new to the show, Chris and I really believe that the problem in the world with financial planning is not a lack of information. It is that there is so much information out there. And so our goal with this show is to really put some context, some stories so that you can start to go, oh, that kind of applies to me, because there's not a one size fits all source of information. So definitely go visit our website at www.nolanfinancialpartners.com. And while you're there, click on the radio page because we record all these shows and you'll find topics from IRAs and 401ks to Medicare to, any kind of financial topic. We've covered it. So you can find what's relevant for you in your life right now. And also while you're there, you can just go ahead and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play. We're on all the platforms because I think this information just needs to get out there, because it's hard to take all this information and go, what applies to me and in my life right now today. So again, that number is 719-210-4242. Give us a call to set up that complimentary discovery call, because we really like to help people get their arms around their finances in a holistic way, looking at the big picture to make sure everything's working together. So we're going to be talking today. We're going to be talking a little bit about inflation, but we're looking at it through the lens of how do you do it as a couple? Because we talk a lot, and in my book, I talk about how money is so much more emotion than it is math. But before we jump into that topic, I wanted to say hello to my amazing co-host, Tony Shore. Tony, how are you doing today?
Tara, I thought you'd never ask. I'm excited. I'm doing well. I'm actually doing great today. Not that that's surprising. I'm usually doing pretty good, but I have been hard at work, got my lawn into shape. We talked about that a week or two ago, but I've been doing great and just keeping really, really busy between kids, finishing up school for the year and starting new adventures and work. It has been crazy. And then, of course, rising inflation, market fluctuation, rising interest rates. So there's all that going on in the news. And I try, sometimes I'm like, I don't want to stick my head in the sand, Tara, but the news, they sensationalize everything, and it seems like the sky is always falling, right? If you go to Fox Business News or CNBC or wherever you get your news, whether it's the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post, New York Times, the sky is falling, but that's how they get you to read the stories and click, and that's how they get advertisers. So you have to take it with a grain of salt, but we have had some tough news, but I think these shows and your book, your educational workshops and webinars, and the show, you're trying to help people get educated so they don't make big mistakes with their money during times like these. And, 2020 might be a tough economical year as far as our economy is concerned, but Americans are resilient, right? And if you have a plan in place, I think we can accomplish great things, right?
Tony, and absolutely, and thank you for that, because I really fight hard. There's a lot of planners that I've come across out there that will sometimes want to push. They say humans are motivated by two things: fear or greed. And
Right.
getting into the psychology of things, I don't like to motivate people with fear, though my understanding is it's quite effective. But I really like to motivate people by not by greed either, I guess. If I had to pick one of the two, I like to educate people and let people understand how they can get themselves back in control and in the driver's seat. And a lot of that starts with just letting people understand, what are your options? Because I think it's really hard with money because there's so much information out there. And just like you said, like everything's got a spin and there's clickbait. And so while there's good nuggets of information out there, you have to weed through all the hype and the sensationalism to go, what do I do? What's going to help me?
Yeah.
And
Is the sky really going to fall on my head and the world
right.
end tomorrow? No, it's
E-
not.
Exactly. And so
Yeah.
I'd like to hopefully with this show put a little bit of focus on it, a little bit of balance, and let people take that deep breath and go, okay, I'm gonna be okay. Here's what I can do to start taking action, because, you were okay, 2 years ago, you were fine. You're still gonna be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and hey, 2022 might be a down year for the economy, but it's going to come back. And it just means it's all that more reason to work with a financial services professional. Make sure you have a plan so you can feel good going forward. The sky isn't falling. Although, Tara, you've indicated that we're going to talk about couples and budgeting and finances. The sky might not be falling. I'm scared because you know how it is when you sit down with your spouse to talk about money issues. That can get a little contentious, can it? I mean,
Well,
obviously not for you and Chris. You always agree, see eye to eye on everything, right?
anyone who's been married for very long knows that it gets real when you start talking about money.
It really gets real. Yeah,
Well, and you
yeah,
just it's really interesting because you think you're on the same page, and then when you start having the conversation, you start realizing the things that you believe, the myths that you bought into from your family, and, it's your family, so you just kind of assume, well, that's what everyone thinks. And then
right,
when you're married or in a relationship, all of a sudden you realize, "Hey, this is a whole individual person that has their own myths and beliefs and
right.
things they take for granted." So it's like an uncovering process to start having that conversation, and it's almost like you're introducing yourselves to each other.
Yes, yeah, and that's why I mean, one way to deal with a lot of couples deal with it is avoid it, and there's nothing worse than that. I can tell you, I've been married 28 years, and it will come up. You might be able to avoid it early on, but you shouldn't because you're in it together. You should work on budgets together, expenses together. Look at those things together and make sure you're both on the same page or have an understanding at least. I mean, you're still going to have, oh, I want to spend my money on this, and he wants to spend his money on that, or she wants to spend her money on that. So the thing is with your spouse, I think the key is have a third party that can kind of be I'm sure you act as a referee sometimes when you meet with couples, but really you're an unaffiliated party who can come in and say, okay, I'm going to take a calm, unemotional look at where you're at and help you make the right decisions. Correct?
That's the goal, and I love it. I was listening to a podcast the other day, with Kevin Hart, and he was sharing a
Oh,
piece
I
of
love Kevin
information
Hart.
from Will Smith. So this is like very like third or fourth hand, but I liked it. Will Smith apparently says, I don't give advice because I don't know you and your situation. What I do is share my experience, and I share what I know from my experience, and hopefully in the sharing of that, you're going to find some nuggets that help you make decisions that will apply to you.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Isn't that good?
Yeah, that's really good, and I know that's what you try to do as well.
Well, and I love that, because who am I to tell you what to do? Because I don't
Yeah,
know everything, and I only know what
yeah,
you tell me, but I can
sure.
certainly share, examples. So just like talking about couples and budgeting, I can tell you there's, some clients I've come across, and, they're on their second marriage, and so they like to keep their finances separate, and that's understandable, right? You get a little gun shy about things. They both have jobs, and they keep everything separate. But it's to the point now, it's interesting that they're filing their taxes, separately, and they're missing out on some good things that they could
Well,
get if they
yeah,
filed jointly. And
yeah, that's
I mean, this
crazy.
is but this is what money is, right? Because it's
Yeah,
emotion more than math. And so we've
true.
talked about it, and they're looking at it, but man, they've had some bad experiences. They just really want to keep it separate. But it's kinda hard, because for me to look at it, because 'cause I'm just the impartial person going, "But look at the rules. If you do it this
Yeah.
way, you could save
Yeah,
money."
imagine what you could take advantage of if you could file jointly. Well, that's just one example of what we're talking about today. And, we were talking about inflation, but one way that couples can fight back against inflation is to work on a budget together, correct?
They can work on a budget, and it's almost interesting. I don't know if I like the word fighting back so much as, what is that, like, being flexible and bending. Like, you don't need to be like head on beating your head against the wall, but you just need to have, it's like the cycle. So while inflation's happening, there's things that we're going to do, and then when inflation goes down, then there's like behaviors that you have for different stages of the financial
Sure.
cycle. And,
Adjustments you make,
yeah, yeah.
and
So
even within your budget.
exactly. And so one of the first things is what happens with inflation, right? Is some of our basic things have just gotten more expensive.
Mhm.
Obviously the big one right now is gas, right?
Huge, yeah, obviously.
So so obviously that's like a big one. So there's just things, so we've had a lot of years of really low inflation. So things like gas and milk, things have been pretty cheap. But I think, normally inflation historically is about 2%, 1 to 3% kind of thing. And I think last year it was like almost 7.
Yeah,
So that's a big shift in your
it's
budget
huge.
because I don't know how you are, Tony, but, for me, I do my budget probably about quarterly, and I kinda know what my expenses are, and I know how much money's coming in. So
Mhm.
I don't sit down like, I can remember my grandfather used to sit down with his checkbook and balance that checkbook, like, every week, down to the penny.
Wow.
And which is awesome, that's great if you have that level, but I kinda look a little bit bigger picture, and I think most of us kinda do that. So what happens with inflation is things can kinda sneak up on you, right?
Right. Yeah, it
Because
definitely can sneak up on
'Cause
you.
you kinda know, like, you're working and you know what your income is and you have a good sense of that, but what happens with inflation is all of a sudden, I mean, I think I went to put it usually to fill my car up, I pay, like, maybe 35 dollars and it was almost 60, almost $70.
Wow.
That's a big difference.
That's huge.
And
Yeah.
so and it's not a case of can you afford it or can you not afford it, it's just it's a whole shift in what was normal. And so with this conversation with when you're in a relationship with your spouse or your partner, you definitely wanna start having this conversation because, right, you're gonna blame the other person. If, you
Of
know,
course.
it's the is that or it's human nature, right?
Yeah.
So, sometimes you have to start doing a little digging and start to talk about that stuff.
Yeah.
But, um, I Tony, I think I love, I read a lot of articles and it's always this process about working together and communicating, and I don't think it matters what you're doing in life, it always comes down to that communication. But it's really important to understand what your spouse thinks about money.
Yeah. It is. It is, and people put off talking about it or doing a budget, but once you get in there and do it and talk about it afterwards, the pressure, the relief, you can sleep well at night. You don't have anything nagging about it in the back of your mind. You both feel better about it. It's going to help your relationship. I mean, it really could be. It's life changing. Just to
Well,
get it aired out.
it is, and one of the things I've noticed, Tony, since I've published my book, Money Moves, is like the first thing I do when I meet with people, I always want to meet with couples together because it just doesn't work, and it's every relationship's different. And in some relationships, there's definitely usually a dedicated person who has the lead with money.
Yeah.
But even if that's the situation, both people need to be aware of what's happening.
Yes.
Because, if the worst, God forbid, happens and something happens to the person that manages all the money, the other person needs to have some kind of idea of at least who to talk to and ask. But it's interesting. So the very first thing that I do, Tony, is, I ask people to go, "What's your vision? What does success look like for you?" And guess what? Do you think that the couples have the same answer?
No.
It's it's usually interesting. I mean, to the point where I had a couple fairly recently that they were coming up on retirement, and one of them was like, "We're gonna downsize our house and we're gonna move in next to the grandkids and, we're gonna," they had this whole plan, and the wife was just kinda looking at him like, "Oh," and shaking her head like, "Oh, no, no, that's not what's gonna happen." And she was like, "We're selling the house and we're getting an
Oh.
RV and we're going full time for a couple years and we're gonna be able to visit the grandkids." And then it was the husband's turn to kinda look at his wife and be like, "So what now?"
That's funny.
And that this is the part I can tell you in my financial training, Tony, with all the certifications and things I got, we didn't have any counseling classes, and
Yeah,
I
that's
just this is people, right? This is human
yeah,
beings 101, and this happens, and
50% of the job.
and so you have to sit there and you're like, "Oh boy, this just got interesting."
Yeah, it did. Yeah,
And
it did.
and one of the things I really like with that's why we do planning, right? Because then you can step out of that space where it has to be like either or. And
Right.
you can start to create a plan that's gonna work for everybody. But step 1 is, we talk about the financial junk drawer, and in my book, I talk about it. just with all of your different 401ks and your IRAs and your insurance and your bank statements and all those things, there's also a junk drawer that lives in your head.
Right.
And that's where you start to have success when you work with couples is you gotta get people to take what's in their head and put that on the table as well.
True. Yeah,
And
you do. That's
and the thing
true.
is people don't even realize, like, they don't even know that they're holding back, or they just have assumed, "Well, we're on the same page." But it's funny because you're like, "Well, did you ever talk about this?"
Yeah.
And it's kind of an interesting thing. Yeah, it just reminds me just a simple thing, like, it's on my bucket list. I've always had the dream of going to hike Machu Picchu, and my
Oh,
little
wow.
brother, he's decided that they're gonna go next year. They had a amazing trip to Cairo, and so he's planned out this trip, and he wants Chris and I to come with him, but he put together the itinerary, and it doesn't have a lot of hiking. It's a different kind of a trip where it's really gonna be driving up almost to the top.
Mhm.
And so while it's still
Sounds like
Machu
isn't that
Picchu.
your brother?
Yeah, it's my brother. It's
Remind
still.
me to go on vacations with your brother and not
I
you.
know. That's what Chris
Sounds
is
much
saying.
better. Chris is like, "Yes, this itinerary is perfect," right?
And and it may just be me alone. I'm like, "I wanted to do the trip where you hike up for 4 days." And apparently I may be the one person who's alone, but it's so we're in the middle of this conversation where we both have,
Yeah.
like, the same end goal of Machu Picchu, but we have apparently very different ideas about how we're gonna get there.
How you're gonna
And
accomplish and what you're gonna do when you get there, yeah.
well, and I'm
Yeah, that's
struggling.
funny.
There was one day on the trip, like, you go because you're up at altitude, so you can't go up all the way and sleep overnight. So one of the days we're gonna stop and get a demonstration of, weaving, and I just Tony, poke my eye out with the stick.
Yeah. A weaving
A
demonstration?
weaving
Really?
demonstration, and,
Hmm.
well, and that's where you get a chance to buy something from the locals, and I'm very happy to contribute to that, but just don't make
Mhm.
me watch the demonstration.
Yeah,
So
really. I don't
so
wanna learn how to weave, but I would like to buy some of your nice final goods that you've weaved.
right. But it's just that thing about couples. So this is probably a great point, Tony, just for anyone who's listening. If you really are thinking about your finances and if you and your husband or your partner have had this discussion, are you on the same page about money? Give Chris and I a call at 719-210-4242 because this is one of the main things we do with couples. We start out right from the beginning and talk about, first of all, what are your goals? What does success look like for you? What is your dream, your vision? If money were no object, what would you want to happen? And that's the one of the very first conversations we have with people. So if you're listening to today's show and you're going, I don't know that we're on the same page, and it might be nice to have some help in that conversation. Give Chris and I a call at 719-210-4242 because once we get that going and get all the cards on the table, if you will, Tony, then that's when you can really start putting the puzzle together to create a really good plan.
Yeah, that's awesome, and that's what you need to do. Now, about our topic today, I'm looking at some of the notes, that you gave me, and you have 4, critical steps to,
Yes.
for couples when they sit down together to work on their budget. Let's talk about what those 4 critical steps are for our listeners out there.
That's great, Tony, and thank you. This is why I need you here to bring me back into focus. So if you've got your pen out, this is the time to take some notes. So, like, the first step is you wanna list all the sources of income you have. You wanna have, your earnings, your interest, your dividends, your annuities, your Social Security, benefits, pensions, IRA distributions, depending on your age, any required minimum distributions. You just want to capture everything. And I can tell you, Tony, this is something that's great to do now because I have a client that just called and she's sorting through her elderly parents and they have, annuities and just checks that they're getting she's like, I'm a forensic accountant at this point because I have
Yeah,
all these
a
documents that I don't
forensic
even
accountant.
know
Yikes.
where they're coming from.
And who wants
So
to be thrust into that position unless you're actually in a forensic accountant by trade, right?
exactly, because 'cause you're not getting paid for it.
No.
And so this is probably the hardest step of any kind of financial planning process is to just get your arms around everything that you have. Don't worry
Yep.
about organizing it or doing anything. Just get it all down on paper.
Make
So
the
that's
list of
make the
all your
list.
sources of income, all your accounts, those types of things.
Yeah, we'll talk about passwords to websites later. So
That's true.
that's my hurdle.
Yeah.
So the second thing that you want to do, Tony, is you want to detail all of your fixed expenses. And I call these your food, clothing, and shelter. But we're talking
Sure.
about your rent or mortgage, your utilities, your insurance, car loans, credit cards, medications, all of those things that are must pays. So
That you
you really want to
expenses you have every single month that you have to pay, the bills as they are.
and you know what a great example I have with this, Tony, is I have some clients that are looking at it and I asked them the question, like what is your monthly budget? And we had to peel it back because it was a really large, but what I figured out is what they were adding into there was they have a desire to help pay for their grandkids' college. And that's
Uh-huh.
awesome, but that is not one of your must pays.
Yeah.
That's an extra thing you're doing. So it took a little
That's an
and
additional outside goal.
exactly. So it took a little
Yeah.
work to go like, okay, we're going to get to that, but what are your no kidding, your rent, your food, clothing, and shelter, those basics
What do you need
first,
to live comfortably? Yeah.
and then we work on your goals and do those things.
Yeah.
So that's the second thing. So the third thing that you're going to want to do then is then you take and you subtract you take your expenses and subtract it from your income. And this is where we see if there's going to be a gap. And hopefully it's a gap in the positive direction that you have more money than you
Yeah.
need.
Yep.
But if it's not, bad news doesn't get better with age.
Right. You have to deal with it at some point, right?
It's
You
just
can't kick that can down the road.
well, you can, but it's much better to deal with it proactively than to be overcome by events.
Yeah.
Because
Definitely.
so this is one of the things, this is where I make my money as a financial planner is my job is to help you identify those gaps and then say, "Okay, the gap's here, what are we gonna do?"
Yeah.
And that's where the planning starts to come in. And then the fourth thing, Tony, that you really wanna look at is to monitor your flexible spending. And this is things like dining out, shopping, travel, entertainment. And this is a super common thing, and Tony, with my clients when they first retire, is one of the things we'll do at, probably a month or two after they've just been living in a fully retired mode, is I'll have them pull out their credit card statements and just kind of go through and do a look see. Because what tends to creep into there is the Home Depot and Lowe's. There's a lot of trips to the store to
Yes.
get the tools, and
Mhm.
and then you have time, so you're gonna go out for lunch where, when you were
Yep.
working, you just didn't have time for that,
That's
and
true.
so, all the things are fine, but they can just start to creep up on it, and again, it's all fine if you're prepared for it, but what you don't wanna do I had a couple, Tony, they generally carried a pretty good credit card bill because they just paid it off at the end of the month, but it was
Sure.
usually about 10,000.
Wow.
What happened to them is it was 27,000 after
Ouch.
they retired, and so then they had to kinda just take a relook to say, "Hey, do you is this what your new bottom line number is gonna be, or do you want to adjust and be in control?" And
Right.
so this is it's all about, like, having good information. It's hard to make decisions when you're operating on, like, hope and luck and, closing your eyes. What's that with the monkey? "See no evil, hear no
Yeah,
evil."
yep, exactly.
That
Yep.
doesn't
See
work
no
as well.
evil, stick your head in the sand, as they say. You can't do that with your budget or with your finances or your spending plan, and so, closely monitor that flexible spending. That's a really good tip, obviously.
Well, and that's one that really directly applies to inflation.
That is
And
true.
looking at that. And what this really leads to, Tony, for the next part of the conversation is in your financial life cycle, if you and your spouse or partner are really close to retirement or you're in retirement, then this is where you wanna make sure that you have some balance between what's in the market and then what is guaranteed. Because it's if you hopefully you've already done it when you go to retire, but you can as I can just tell you with couples, Tony, this is one of those big conversations that we have to have is, each person's comfort level with risk.
Yeah.
And
Risk always plays a part in this, doesn't it?
it always plays a part, and there's not a right or wrong answer. There's just if you want to sleep well at night, you need to be honest and really create that balance to go, some people don't want to have all their money in the market. Some people do, and it's trying to find that balance. And obviously for me, I think it's nice when you have a little of both.
Right.
I don't believe generally all in one way or all in the other way is normally the best way, but you definitely want to have that conversation because you don't want one person in a relationship feeling terrified all the time.
No.
And then you
No,
don't want the
you
other person just angry all the time because they're frustrated that they're, not in the market.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so there has to be some balance there, and I know, that's why I always smile because, as much as you are a financial services professional, you also end up being a counselor and, as a psychologist because you need to make sure that there is a balance where both parties, when you work with couples, it's that added element, and a lot of times, financially, couples have an advantage over singles, but at the same time, you have to be able to get on the same page and work together.
You have to get on the same page. And then, Tony, I know we're getting close, but the other thing that I really want to remind couples to be looking at in the financial process is what happens when one person passes to the income?
Mm,
Because no one wants to think about that. But I
sure.
have a lot of couples, Tony, and this really applies to women for the most part right now, mostly because the primary breadwinner traditionally has been the husband, and they're doing awesome in retirement. But then when the husband passes, sometimes a lot of money goes away because you're
Yeah,
going to
and women
lose.
typically outlive men. I mean, that's just a statistic. It's not always that way, but typically women outlive men. So you end up with a lot of women single in retirement, and that with the loss of that income.
And it can be a lot of income because it used to be like for my grandmother, she had an amazing my grandfather passed and she continued to get his full retirement for another 25
Wow,
years.
his full pension and retirement. Yeah.
I don't see that happening very much, if at all
Nope.
anymore.
That's gone the way of the pension,
And,
so to speak.
here in Colorado, we have para where a lot of times for the teachers' retirements, they'll give you the option, like you can take a little bit less for some guarantee for your spouse. But a lot of companies, there may be nothing for the spouse. So
Yeah.
it's one of those questions you just want to know. Whatever the
Yes.
answer is, you don't want to wait and see. You want to know, and then you're going to lose one of the social securities as well.
Yeah.
And
You wanna make sure you understand the Social Security, strategy in case of a loss of a spouse, and there are strategies. You can take the larger of the 2, but you're still going to be missing one of the 2, so you're gonna lose that income
and it can
if
be a
y
couple $1,000s a month.
Yes.
And I
I
mean,
mean, that's make or break for a lot of people.
we talk it's one of those dark jokes, but we're like, the person who passed had to eat a heck of a lot of groceries to make up that difference
Yeah.
to say
Yeah,
we
you
don't
think,
need.
"Oh, the money I'll save." Nope, you're not gonna save that much money. You're only gonna save a little bit on groceries. Other than that, you still have to pay the same housing amount, the same utility amount probably or close. So, yeah, it's not like there's a lot of savings when you lose a spouse, but you do lose income. And so that has to be part of the planning, right?
It does, so Tony, if I had to wrap up and to talk about today's show, I would say it's always a good time. I like people to do it once a year, but now is a great time if you haven't had this open, honest conversation with your spouse. Just take a look at your budget because here's what I don't want for people is I don't want inflation to cause money problems to creep up silently like the price of gas went up and the price of milk went, groceries and all those things. And all of a sudden you're going, what happened? I've got this
Mm,
huge credit card bill I've never had before because then that, when you're fighting and you're grumpy, it's not good. So
mm-mm.
if you're listening to today's show, make some time to have this conversation, get your arms around your everything that you have, and just kind of look at everything and go, "Hey, okay, we're good," or "Hey, we've got some gaps and we need to make a plan."
Yeah, exactly. Great show today, Tara. Give that phone number one more time.
Sure. So if you want to call for the complimentary discovery call, that is 719-210-4242. That's 719-210-4242. And when you come for the appointment, remind us that you came from the radio show and we will give you a complimentary copy of my new book, Money Moves.
All right. Sounds great, Tara. Thanks for that. And listeners, that does it for today's episode of Nolan Financial Radio with our host, Tara Nolan.
Join us again for another episode. Take care, and we'll talk with you next time.